Okay. I'll kick us off. So this is a meeting for members and giving an opportunity to members of the Environment and Climate Committee, an opportunity to provide input into our electrification policy options analysis project. So the purpose of today's
actually the live stream is not
sorry.
started yet.
Should I start over?
It's actually not loading. So one moment, I'm gonna mute.
Okay, one moment, everybody. Again.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is a meeting it's an opportunity for members of the Environment and Climate Committee to provide input into our electrification policy options analysis project. So the purpose of today's meeting is really for members of the ECC to share their policy or other program or initiative ideas for us to be considering as we do this project. So we're joined by a couple of Environment and Climate Committee members and also our consultant team who are going to facilitate the discussion. And then at the end of the meeting, I'll also just share what the next steps are for this project. And then if we have time and if there's members of the public present, if at the end we can hold a little bit of time for public comment. So I will first start with a quick roll call and then we can do, then parametrics, you guys can introduce yourselves and just go ahead and take it away if that sounds good. Okay, so for roll call, I have included here several members of the Environment and Climate Committee who had expressed interest in attending today. So we have Andrew, who's not present, Laura, who's not present, Lauren Fraser.
Present.
Neil Bonsgard.
Here.
And Rory Isbell, who's also not present. Okay, I can turn it over then to the parametrics team if you guys want to take it away.
Thanks, Kathy. We'll just start with some quick introductions. I am Tracy Lunsford, and I'm the project manager on this project and helping the city review different policy options for electrification. And we'll introduce Maddie.
Hi all, I'm Maddie Cheek and I am also on the consultant team doing a lot of the analysis for this project to understand the policy options.
And we just wanted to start with a little bit of background and foundation setting. I'm sure none of this will be new information for you, but just for general context for the overall discussion. And I'm going to quickly try to share my screen here. All right, is my screen showing up in the room?
Yes.
Great,
Yeah.
Thanks. So just a couple background things, as we're looking at different policy options and reviewing them, we're finding that they're falling in a variety of themes or categories. Most options are falling either in addressing city-owned buildings and facilities, looking into local regulations. Other options are disincentivizing non-electric technologies, looking into retrofitting or upgrading existing buildings and infrastructure, actively incentivizing electrification, performing outreach and education, supporting the adoption of state level policy, and then a variety of other things that we're seeing as well. So just to let you know kind of the general landscape of the policies that we've identified or we have seen in other communities that we'll be looking into. And then We also just wanted to provide basic background information about the common end uses of electricity and natural gas in both residential and commercial buildings. Electricity is primarily used in residential setting for space heating, space cooling, water heating, and lighting. And then we tend to see natural gas in the residential building sector, primarily for space heating and water heating, though we will note that there's cooking is a lower volume use of natural gas, but has other impacts with indoor air quality. And then for the commercial buildings, with electricity, we see ventilation, lighting, cooling, and a variety of other uses. And then natural gas shows up in the commercial sector, typically in space heating, water heating, and then cooking is a significant volume usage for commercial buildings. So we just wanted to provide a little bit of information and background there about kind of where we tend to see electricity and natural gas showing up in building use. And with that, really open up the floor for comments and ideas from ECC committee members regarding the sorts of considerations, policies, and things that you would like us to keep in mind as we are starting this research into the variety of policies that might be appropriate for Bend. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And our goal is for this to be a conversation. And mainly we're looking to hear from you all. And so primarily from Neil and Lauren, what your ideas are and thoughts about electrification policies.
Great. Well, I think I just want to point out that it's hard to do the one person in person, one person not in person. So Lauren, if I cut you off, we can see your face on both sides of the room. So just speak up. Yep. Great.
I'll wave about wildly if I need to cut it.
Want to share some thoughts first, Lauren?
I was going to say you should go first, Neil.
Great. I guess one connection or question in that background information that you're sharing is just, I think it's important to explore the connection between access to gas when there's gas either stubbed out to a property or already connected to a property versus the volume of gas that ends up being used over time. So on that slide, there was a reference to the large volume uses of natural gas being around space and water heating, but that those other uses do still exist in the residential world around cooking and also gas fireplaces. And so I guess that connection, I would be curious to see some more clarity or analysis. I know anecdotally, I've heard from builders that largely customers don't care that much how their water or space is getting heated, because it's just into the weeds that they're not really paying as close attention to, but that there's the tangible pieces of the stove and fireplace that encourage builders, once they know they're doing those pieces, to then say, well, I already have gas on property, and so I'll choose to do those other items. So kind of a circular question there, but I think trying to explore the nexus of when gas is stubbed out at a property or provided because of one of those low volume uses, how does that impact decisions by the builder or occupants in larger volume gas uses around space and water heating?
Thanks for that. Lauren, do you have it? So our goal here is to really take in your comments. So we won't be providing a lot of answers right now because we need to go out and look into these questions before we provide answers. So, Lauren, do you have anything that you'd like to jump in with right now?
Yes. So, I mean, I guess I have notes, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to sort of go through this like item by item. I sort of agree with your like list of all the things that you're hearing about. I think one important thing to just really, I guess, highlight up from the beginning is new buildings and existing buildings. And that I think it's important to think about addressing both of those as we're considering policy. Bend is an interesting community because we are having so much new construction still, and the city continues to grow. So I think new buildings are really impactful in that respect. But the bulk of our building stock, both residential and commercial is existing. And so really thinking about the greenhouse gas emissions from those buildings and how we think about policy options for retrofitting, I think is an important part of this conversation. Okay, and I have one other question before we like jump into policy options on the like calculations. And I know you're not, this is sort of, I guess I'll give a comment versus asking you a question. I think when we're thinking about impacts, it's not just the usage from an individual appliance of sort of in terms of emissions, but also thinking about the connections along the way. And so, thinking about leakages of methane and, there's studies along that. And if we're increasing our piping of methane, what that looks like in terms of additional emissions from leakage, I think should just be something that's considered as we're like thinking about these calculations. Okay, I'll pause for a second. Neil, do you want to jump in on any of those things before we like get into deeper policy?
Yeah, I think that's an important component, and I think we've done a lot of exploring as the ECC and just general interest on these topics because it's been something that has been of interest and a piece that's been identified by the ECC as a missing component of our climate actions as a city for a while. So the questions that you're wrestling with or being asked to wrestle with aren't new to the question, they're the questions we've been asked as well. And I think that component philosophically, like Lauren mentioned, of like, expanding a network, how much of the impact is from the expansion of the network versus the end use. I know, again, anecdotally, that every house that I've lived in has had some sort of gas leakage from either an appliance or from the meter itself that I've had to call the gas company out to come address. And when I ask about it, because I'm doing it, because I'm like, I know that methane emissions are a big deal. I don't want this to be a normal thing, but like I probably call the gas company at least 4 or 5 times a year from walking down the street and smelling a gas leak. Not a gas leak that would be at the level of, although they treat them all as emergencies, but I'm not a strong enough gas leak that we're necessarily worried about explosion, but a gas leak that's strong enough that they're having to upgrade equipment. And I don't know how much of that gets caught. Actually, I feel like, and I've heard the numbers shared about those gas leakages not being as high as they are, especially where they're happening in a system. Gas leakage is usually something that's accounted for in like pipeline distribution, but when you get out into the distribution grids, those are often missed. So just recognizing those additional components as you talk about kind of gas network expansion or gas network impacts.
Thank you. Any other key considerations just for the existing infrastructure or usage cases that you would like us to be considering before we move on to maybe thinking about some policy ideas that you might have?
I think maybe another consideration, just big picture wise is the universe of options, like the current exercise that you all have been tasked with is a kind of wild one of all of the options. And I guess just thinking through the process of how this stakeholder involvement is happening, this idea generation coming back and then decision making happening from there. I would just also want to reflect back on what the initial request was from council of ideas of wanting to come back with ideas. And this is my summary of it, but it'd be great to, I'm looking at city councilor in the room. But thinking back on the request, really looking for ideas that would have a substantial impact on gas reduction. And I know sometimes through these processes, ideas are put forward, whether with good intent or ill intent, that might not have a significant impact on gas use. And so I just want to, like, as we're making this list, make sure that the body of I would like to see a list that all is actually addressing that question of things that are having a significant impact on gas use, or have like kind of a strategic direction in moving towards that reduction, and being in line with our climate goals.
Thanks. Lauren, anything to add?
I'll just give, for the sake of ECC viewpoint on this, a quick synopsis of our the climate action plan for the city of Bend, and really what our committee is focused on working on within the city. So our sort of overarching goal is to have a 40% reduction in fossil fuel use by 2030, 70% by 2050. And 48% of our emissions as of our last accounting are coming from residential and commercial electricity use. And so the majority of that's from buildings. So I think just to highlight that this is the biggest source of emissions in the city, coming from buildings, and there's sort of an energy supply thing in there that we can talk about as well. But we can't hit those goals by just cleaning up supply alone. For electricity, for example, we also need to be working on natural gas, which is why we're having this conversation. And that is two-sided. There's like both the energy supply side and the demand side, which is all of the appliances that are in our buildings. So I think just to kind of tee up this conversation, it's really thinking about all of those end uses of that gas are really important as part of how we're having this conversation. And so it's both cleaning up supply and making that cleaner, and also the demand side. Anything else there?
The additional background of since the Environment and Climate Committee has been meeting, which I think was the beginning, was like January of 2021-ish.
Yeah.
Maybe a little before that.
Yeah. Or maybe that was when my
I think it was
chairmanship
November,
started.
2020,
Yeah.
October,
Okay.
November,
Yeah. So 2020, 2021. The members of this committee were different, except for one person that brought continuity from the group that was creating the city's climate action goals, or that were involved in that process. It was a community-based effort, but largely a different group of people. And in getting caught up with that, and in meeting to talk about the different areas of the climate action goals, it was identified pretty early by members of the different working groups in the ECC that we felt like gas usage was kind of a glaring hole in the climate action goals of the city. And so it's been something that has been actively talked about by the ECC, and recommended in different forms of it being something that gets brought up as like just a point on the record in a meeting to official recommendation over the past 4.5 years. And I think some of that has been through an evaluation of the CCAP goals, the estimated impact, and then also just recognizing a significant energy source that in our planning didn't have targets addressed, didn't have strategies addressed at reduction of gas use or of gas system expansion in the region. So I wanted to say that too.
Thanks. Would you like to switch to talking about some potential policies that you think we should, or it can be specific policies or maybe policy direction that you think is important for us to consider in the variety of things that we'll be looking into?
Yeah.
You want me to start, Neil?
That'd be great.
Okay. So I think we are probably all familiar with what has happened with the Berkeley decision and sort of the policies that had been enacted by a number of cities to reduce emissions from natural gas has been, what's the word I'm looking for? Challenge isn't the right word. There's preemption. So I think doesn't make sense to explore those policies as much because of what's happened from challenges from the courts, but thinking about other policies that have now been proposed around nitrogen oxide emissions makes a lot of sense to explore. So locally, that's what Ashland is looking at. That's what has the Bay Area air quality, what's it called? Council has proposed for the state of California, or sort of state of California, and then the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has proposed. So I think there's other examples with nitrogen oxide policy that we should be looking into. And I think the thing that those also really address, in addition to obviously reduced natural gas usage, is also health impacts, with air pollution, and both indoor and outdoor air pollution. So I'll start with that. Anything else to add, Neil, on NOx policy?
Yeah, I think that component, it's interesting in the context of having clearly defined goals, but also having significant limitations as a city. So I think recognizing that there are things that we may have wanted to suggest that are just outside of the scope of what's possible from the city of Bend. So for example, if you were concerned about indoor air quality, methane leaks, and combustion inside of the home, and those might be targeted towards some of the lower volume appliances, you may also want to pair that with a restriction or an encouragement to improve other things that improve indoor air quality in the home, like good ventilation system, balanced ventilation, or other requirements that are similar to that. But recognizing that as a city, we have limitations on the areas that we have influence over, and things like that are specifically called out in building code are challenging or preempted for us to be able to address specifically. So it's just a general statement. I think in addition to a low NOx pathway, I think another opportunity to explore would be two different opportunities to explore maintaining some level of choice while providing opportunities to electrify, which I heard was a recommendation from council as well. So one of those would be using franchise fees to an increased franchise fee on gas use, and then using the funds from that franchise fee to establish some sort of efficient or some sort of electrification efficiency fund for recognizing that conversion is a lot more challenging than new construction. So that's one area that I think could be explored in the realm of kind of lower less restrictive restrictions in the carrots and sticks category. And another area that we've heard other folks explore would be a carbon pollution fee, and just exploring the opportunities in Oregon for a different type of fee if something is existing to the current build out of the gas network versus new connections. And so exploring a carbon pollution fee in addition to exploring restrictions on new connections could be another way of kind of accomplishing both of those goals. That would be a second kind of fee-based thing to explore. And in the we have also, in a lot of buildings work, you get stuck in a paradigm of new construction versus used buildings, or new construction versus existing building stock. And how I see that play out in other arenas around building decarbonization and other building goals and restrictions is a lot of people involved are usually involved in one side of that equation or the other side of the equation. And there's important reasons to address both new construction and existing buildings that I don't think negate the opposite. So I think policies, ideally comprehensive policies that address both, are the best way of doing that. And I don't think that policies saying it's only, or there's a ton of opportunity in new construction, so we should only address new construction. There's a ton of merit to that because new construction usually has the lowest cost to make that switch over. But then also the argument of we also need to address existing buildings because they're a significant share of our building stock currently. And if we don't address them, then we still have a significant amount of gas use that we're addressing over time. So I would really heavily encourage options to address both, whether those are independent actions or whether they're actions that can support each other. I don't see it as an either or, nor a responsibility of just one area or another.
I can just add on a few other things that I think are consider, and I would put these as probably potentially more voluntary, lower, not all of them are going to be voluntary, but potentially lower impact than some of the things we've talked about. So one that we've talked about a lot is our current city buildings and any future city buildings that are going to be built, and facilities. And so I know staff and council are working on a resolution here, but would really encourage the city to lead by example and have policy for our current and future buildings to reduce or eliminate natural gas use. And then have it also, as Neil just mentioned, policy for retrofitting as well, and not just net new for city buildings. The other couple I wanted to make sure we talked about were in terms of incentivizing electrification. We can think about incentives, permitting, and thinking about there's different carrots and sticks there, but prioritizing all electric permitting or permitting, or around the things that are going to reduce gas use, And then in turn, disincentivizing or putting, more hurdles around permitting that would include gas. And then we could also think about, this is sort of on the, again, the net new side, or it could apply to permits for renovations or other things. We, reduced fees or taxes around new buildings that are built without gas. And then the same thing fees could be applied around gas. So I think there's just some carrots and sticks there that we want to mention, or I want to mention around those options as well. And lots of cities have been employing various versions of those.
I can also add on that, where's my thought going with this? I don't know how this piece moves forward, but it seems like in working with the city, there are opportunities. There's some things that are hard to adjust independently from existing programs and existing incentives, but those incentives get reviewed on a regular basis. So things around franchise fees, impact fees, system development charges, permitting processes, and all of those different areas will usually have some component to try to encourage some level of city goal, whether it's because it's a city goal or because of its direct connection to the impact on the community as a whole. And so I don't know how this shows up in this process. And maybe it would need to be something outside of that. But I think recognizing that electrification meets a lot of those community goals around providing something that long term, if we're going to meet our climate goals, it's less expensive to electrify up front than it is to build gas and then retrofit in the future, especially if the city is going to consider future restrictions in the future. That has an additional burden. So when opportunities come up, it'd be great to include electrification in the list of requirements or in the scoring criteria for projects, whether that be residential, multifamily, commercial projects, that is included in those moving forward. How that actually shows up tangibly is a challenging thing, and I don't know if that would be a recommendation for a resolution or if it would just be part of the recognition of the broader goal of electrification and it showing up. But being able to reference that, I think would be helpful, because those usually are opportunities where you have an existing program that already has the opportunity to sway development, and including this because it is identified as a climate goal in those policies moving forward would be valuable to do. I just am not sure what the pathway is in this process.
Lots of ideas here. Anything else that you've been thinking about, different policies or maybe specific example policies that are striking to you as good examples?
Or even if there's anything you guys have seen, like other types of programs, even like examples you've seen from other cities that you feel like are compelling, that you would be interested in replicating, even something as simple as like a big outreach campaign, anything that you've seen particularly effective, or some other types of technical assistance programs that can also, because this, as a reminder, we are trying to kind of look at the whole spectrum with this analysis. So yeah, and does that trigger anything for you guys?
I'll just say again, I think the things that tend to be most effective are the ones that are built into policy, regulation, code, not voluntary. So I think really thinking about those is a really important part of this process. I think the other thing that we haven't really touched upon that I think has also been effective in other places is finding a pool of funding for these opportunities, and whether that funding is going toward operating a program like Cassie's mentioning, providing incentives for, additional incentives for people to make upgrades, types of zero interest loans to help people make upgrades, navigator services to help people make upgrades or educate the building community on what incentives are available, how to install, creating workforce development programs, just transition funds. Like, I think there's so many needs in this space to figure out some funding. So I think that's also just a big piece of this is identifying where that could be coming from. And we've mentioned a couple of examples there with things like right-of-way fees, franchise fees that could be utilized. But I do think that's an important part of this discussion is, sort of how those programs can be built. I think, and Cassie, I'm happy to send you guys some examples too, but I think things that have been effective, like the state of Maine, for example, cold climate, has the highest rate of heat pump adoption, and at least in what I've seen, the sort of keys to success and how they've been able to operate their program is it's very easy. They have high buy-in from their contractor community and like a really great working relationship with them, but it's very low friction for their installer community to apply for and receive incentives on behalf of their their clients, whoever they're installing for. The incentives are really easy, they are high, they make sense. And it's a pretty low friction program and how to do it. And they've done a lot of education and outreach to the community around cold climate equipment that can work down to -20 degrees and works in a cold state like Maine. But I think programs that are simple, high incentive, like, and high education, high information are ideal. Massachusetts, similarly has a pretty high incentive program and has done well doing a lot of upgrades. So I think we can happy to send some of those over, but I think that those are kind of some of the keys I've seen. And then more locally, there's examples of, just cities that have done those types of things and not entire states. I do think on the more local level, having trusted messengers, really working with the community and community-based organizations that are doing this work out in the community, have neighbors talking to neighbors, really working with our workforce of installers and contractors, and doing a lot of education there, I think is also really important as part of the transition. Feel free to jump in, Neil.
Yeah, I think similarly, you looking at places that have really high adoption rates, there's lots of components that play into that. Some of that is kind of good one-stop shop, identifying how incentives overlap, providing additional incentives, but also providing some effort into the workforce component of that. Vermont and their statewide efficiency program, VEIC, they've been super successful in heat pump water heater deployments and identifying barriers, and they have a ridiculously high adoption rate. Heat pump water heaters are one of my personal pet, one of the areas that I really enjoy to geek out on because I think it's a huge opportunity. And I have installed 2 of them I've installed many of them or encouraged friends or ordered them for friends or worked on incentive programs to provide to folks. So identifying barriers in kind of technology by technology, because they're all going to need different approaches, whether that's we like to use one of the methods that we use is community-based social marketing, but really looking at challenges, barriers to adoption, and perceived and real barriers to adoption, and perceived and real benefits of adoption, and then having specific goals to target those individually. It can be challenging if the answer is just education and outreach. That might be one of the barriers, but usually, unless you're addressing multiple other barriers, like the education, and then also recognizing that part of that is having one point of contact to do multiple pieces of work, all those other components. So I think the earlier question was like other examples. I know that the city of Ashland has been working through a lot of gas options in Oregon, so in a similar legal landscape, because that is a question that's been brought up by staff. So City of Ashland and the ideas that they've put forward would be helpful to explore, or I'd like to explore. Also, Lewis and Clark Law School has been distributing some resources and analysis on their end of different policy solutions that they see as being possible in the state of Oregon. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're just looking at summarizing policy ideas or if you're also looking at the summarizing the broader reasons why people are interested in different policies, but happy to dive into those if that's part of this process of why we think it's an opportunity to address new construction, or why we think it's an opportunity to restrict the growth of the network. But I don't think we're necessarily completely in the why component yet. And then another area that I don't know if I have examples, maybe you do, Lauren, or maybe it's just been talked about a lot, is looking at opportunities to address Bend is growing, and trying to reduce emissions at the same time. Looking at individual projects, the most effective time to address those projects, especially if you're incorporating the infrastructure costs included in those, whether there's incentive for it or not, those are dollars spent by our community, whether through rates or individually, is in new construction. So another area that I haven't heard explored by others in the state of Oregon, but would be curious about as an option, is using some city authority around the use of their right of way and how franchises are structured. If there's an opportunity to inventory and limit new pipeline development or capacity increases in gas pipeline, I don't know if that's possible, but that might be another area to explore. And then in terms of an outreach campaign, I was trying to look it up. I want to say Bainbridge Island, but do you know, was it Bainbridge, Lauren?
I think it's Bainbridge. Yeah.
Bainbridge Island did a very concentrated heat pump promotion project, both from a climate lens, but also they have a different energy landscape on the island that's outside of Seattle. But they did a really effective and intensive both education and streamlining of installation project that was set up to be a pilot. So I think that there's probably learnings from that, that if we're building a similar program here would be really helpful. And then a whole other area that we haven't really talked about is around city operations. And I think that has also been mentioned by council and is in our strategic energy management plan, but in terms of the quick win opportunities, both having a public commitment for new construction of buildings, but also exploring a commitment of what upgrade or retrofit to an existing building looks like, that would also trigger us looking to electrify to maintain the that role of being committed to our goals. And I know it's a little weird because we have, as the city's like kind of main building stock is primarily in the foreseeable future looking at relocation and new construction, not a lot of retrofits. It's a little bit less tangible. But I think thinking through those in times of clarity where there's not a single project that you're trying to, shoehorn into a policy might be the time when we have the most clarity to say, yeah, when we're redoing a building, if we changed our mind and decided to keep City Hall here, that would be the right time to look at an electrification option.
Just one clarification, it's Whidbey Island.
Would be okay.
Happy to send that over too.
Yeah. I grew up in Washington, and all of the high schools that were on islands were really good at swimming. So I get them a little confused. Sorry, Whidbey and Bainbridge.
Maybe another thing that we can discuss is things that you're hearing in the community and considerations that we should know about that would be helpful as we are evaluating policy options.
As a committee, we've gotten a lot of outreach recently from, I'd say mostly environmental groups that are really encouraging the transition to electrification, reduction of natural gas. If it's helpful, I can just like read a couple of the sort of key points on those. Is this helpful? Do you want me to just read? Okay. So the kind of, and some of these letters are very similar. So I'll read the kind of key points that are coming out of those. Encourage the city to commit to electrify all city-owned buildings in Bend by 2030, set a goal for 50% of all homes and buildings to be electrified by 2030, create policy and programs to achieve this outcome, to create policies that require all newly constructed buildings and homes to be all electric to the full extent allowable under the law, starting no later than 2025, and strengthening the city's existing right-of-way law to increase revenue and create a climate justice fund to support inclusive community-wide electrification. So I think a number of the emails we've gotten as a committee say something sort of similar to that, are really in support of this transition. Yeah, Neil, do you want to jump in with anything else on that?
Yes. I think there's been increased interest in natural gas use in the time that I've been in Bend, which is the last 9 years. Ooh, that's probably coming up. Like, I'm close to my Bendiversary. 9 years. So I think there's been an increased interest in this, an increased interest in appliances in the home and their impact. Like I'd mentioned earlier, when I first moved here, this wasn't a top level concern. It wasn't something people were talking about. And a lot of the electric alternatives just weren't as good. So it changes the context when you were considering electrification. It wasn't really a consideration because you were talking about electric resistance, and really the difference between natural gas and electric resistance is a much different experience from the user experience, from the energy consumption experience, from the impact to the grid and all of those other components. So that's changed a lot. I've had personally multiple indoor gas leaks in our house from a gas fireplace that over the years had some issues in combustion and its ventilation that was shocking to our installer, that it was not setting off our carbon monoxide alarms inside the house because their detector, as they were walking out of the truck, was going off, which is a little terrifying. So it was exciting to get that out of the house. And we also had a gas dryer, and the gas dryer had a malfunctioning valve and was sending unburnt natural gas just straight out the exhaust, for a long period of time until we were out on that side of the house during the middle of a drying cycle and didn't know how long that was happening and was a risk to both health and safety. So I think people are recognizing it. There's been a lot of information coming out about health impacts of gas stoves and their impact. And I had an idea tied to the first piece that I was saying. I think it's not the same assumption that it used to be. And hopefully I'll come back to the other thought that was paused in the middle of there.
I can just jump in with one other thing we've heard, and sort of a consideration that's definitely on my mind a lot, which is thinking about equity and cost, and how thinking about equity in our community with as it applies to this. So a couple of things. There's one study, and if you don't have access to this, we can send it to you, that the Synapse Energy Economics has done just around costs and savings. And so they show that all electric homes with high efficiency heat pumps save about $190 in energy bills compared to gas heating. There's also, looking at building all electric from the start. There's a lot of incentives and rebates out right now that can make that cheaper. And also, if you're not adding, as Neil mentioned, an additional hookup from the start. So I think just being thoughtful about the potential, I'll call it like savings from building all electric from the start, what that could look like. And then as we think about retrofitting, what the sort of cost and savings look like in that over time. But I think there's good information that supports this transition can be more cost effective for residents in ongoing operations. But I think that's just another piece to be looking at, and that I'm thoughtful about as we sort of talk about this.
Another component, and I should really start writing these down. I think I had mentioned it's kind of changed the game a little bit, that the equipment's just gotten better. So heat pump water heaters have evolved a lot in the last 8 or 9 years, and then heat pumps and their ability to operate at cold temperatures has changed. I think another recognized opportunity is investments that are not being made for cost savings, but being made for safety and comfort around adding cooling to buildings that didn't previously have it, because it wasn't. This is like a full circle moment. Climate change has changed our need for cooling in our environment. In the Northwest, cooling was not built into most homes. It wasn't needed because we didn't have as many extended periods of heat. The number of days over 95 degrees in Bend has increased significantly, and those often are clustered together, which changes the need for cooling and the danger and the deaths that we've seen around heat waves and the heat dome. So that both is leading to individual investments that are already happening in adding cooling. And that's an additional identified opportunity, is anytime somebody is adding cooling, that is a heat pump. It's just whether that can also do heating, that's a relatively small investment to make those two things happen at the same time. So that's another opportunity area that's been talked about in the state, is leveraging the fact that people are willing to spend dollars, and or there's funding available for programs around rental units or other reasons to include cooling for safety, to have that also provide an efficient heating source. And then on the efficiency side, or on the affordability side, I think we also have really amazing partners in Central Oregon. Since the time that I've been here, the main capital A affordable housing providers of Rooted Homes, Habitat for Humanity, Thistle and Nest, and Pacific Crest Affordable Housing are all building with the recognition that energy affordability is a part of affordable housing. And so they have, in many cases, built not just more efficient than, not just code, because it's the least expensive thing to build, but they've built both above code and oftentimes net zero all electric buildings. So I think we're really lucky that we have those partners and that recognition in the people that are actually doing the work around affordability. And so they're great partners to consult when there are questions about affordability.
And we also had another letter sent by a pretty big group of local builders that that were also really encouraging this transition to all electric building. And happy to share that as well.
Thank
And
you.
highlighting a number of the things that we've talked about.
I just want to
Thanks.
check because
Yeah.
we only have a minute. Do you guys have any sort of final thoughts you really want to make sure we get recorded here? Because I would like to just put up a slide of next steps as well.
I think one last piece that I've heard concerns over, can the grid handle electrification? And I've heard concerns over well, that's the one that I'm thinking of right now because I'm not writing things down. And I think that one of the benefits of a lot of these programs are encouraging heat pumps across the board. And from what I've been able to tell, heat pumps, the number of heat pumps that it takes replacing electric resistance heat, which is a win-win-win, and a failure if electric resistance heat exists in any form, are often opportunities, open up opportunities in the electrification space. And then also recognizing the policy context of the path towards clean energy that we have in the state of Oregon, and how that plays into the aren't you just replacing dirty for dirty conversation. So I think clarifying that and committing and explaining that in a city component would be valuable. So last comments, we can look at next step.
Anything from you, Lauren?
Nope, I think that was a great closing. Yeah.
Okay. Tracy, is it okay if I move on? Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we all have a clear understanding of the next steps for this project. So the next time the ECC will really engage with this topic is hopefully tentatively scheduled for your October 10th meeting. And we're hoping to have that list of the draft policy options provided to you there. That will be the start of the ECC having an opportunity, taking time to deliberate and actually develop a recommendation to the council about which of those policies to further explore and if there are any actions in there that you want to recommend as short-term action items. Once that public draft is released, we will proceed with a number of stakeholder interviews because we want to get some stakeholder input on those policies as well. So we have in the process, we had held scope for 5 stakeholder interviews, including an environmental focused one, a business focused one, and then one for each of our utilities. So we have 2 electric utilities and 1 gas utility. So we'll do those in October, hopefully with the goal of being able to share some of the insights from those with the ECC for your November meeting. And then the hope is that between the October meeting and the November meeting, you all will be able to deliberate and develop a recommendation. I'm anticipating that the committee might want to or need to have an additional working group meeting in between those. In order to just have some more time. So we'll make that decision at the October meeting and delegate that group if that feels necessary. And then the goal is to get a recommendation from the ECC to the council by December. So that's the path forward. And then really quickly, because I said we would at the beginning, is there anyone in the public who would like to share a comment? And if so, you can raise your hand and we can give you a couple of minutes to share a comment. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Is there, before we adjourn, do you guys have any questions on those next steps that I have up there?
Is there this is a public meeting.
Mhm.
The ECC meetings are public meetings. So those are opportunities for public input that's like officially on the record.
Mhm.
Um,
You're asking about like public comment at those meetings?
yeah,
Yeah, we can plan on including time for public comment at those meetings. I think
Yeah.
that's probably a good idea.
um,
It's not required
There's
of every
not-
public meeting, that's why
Right.
I say it like that.
Yeah.
But that would be an opportunity for people to share their comments directly with the ECC. The ECC does have an email address as well.
Right.
ECC@bendoregon.gov, so people can send comments there. We've already received some comments there too.
okay. And then do you anticipate there being a ECC recommendation and a staff recommendation to council, or do you think there will be kind of a shared recommendation?
I think it remains to be seen a little bit. I think we've been talking about that internally, and it's just a little hard to say until we like have the policy options that we're
Okay.
looking at. So we will just have to discuss that as we get further in the process, what that looks like, and what the council, what would be the most helpful for the council, and
Yeah.
what type of information we feel like we need to share.
And then council making their decision is a totally public process where there's opportunity to give feedback. 'Cause
Yes,
that's
of
the
course.
final decision making.
Yeah, and in
Okay.
December,
Just
that's
kind
gonna
of-
take place because there's not actually, there's not really like a final decision being made in December necessarily, or not something that requires like a council. I'm trying to think of the right way to word it. The December meeting is planned as a work session because it's really meant to be a discussion with council about some short-term action items to move ahead and also further options to explore. So it's not like at that December meeting, they're gonna be saying like, yes, develop this program. It's more of direction on this process because we have the phase 1 and the phase 2 process. So I anticipate that council meeting being in a work session in that kind of format. But again, we'll have more detail about that as we get closer. It's always a little hard to anticipate how it will evolve
Yeah.
months in advance.
Great.
Okay, perfect. Well, then we can adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks to our parametrics team.
Thank you.
Thank you.